Hi everyone, my name is Staff Sergeant Horan. I flew a T-6 aircraft in San Francisco and almost crashed it into the Golden Gate Bridge. Ha! That was only a simulation, but I did still fly it. The instructor played a game on my head. These games can be life or death when it's in an aircraft. Today I'm going to talk about how to save a pilot from crashing a plane in physiological episodes. I want to talk about the graveyard spirals, the leans, hypoxia, what positive and negative G-forces are, and I'm also going to talk about the G-strain maneuver and how to properly demonstrate it for you. Now, let's get into our first topic, graveyard spirals. Can anyone guess as to why it may be called graveyard spirals? Yes, Sergeant Kincaid. Correct, because it is going to spiral down, it's going to hit the ground, it's going to go straight into the grave. You're absolutely right. Let's go to the very beginning. Let's talk about the fluid in our ears. Has anyone had maybe one too many adult beverages to drink and you go to lay down for the night and the room is just spinning? Because your fluid is moving in the direction that you are. So when you suddenly lay down, it causes you to feel nauseous, sometimes even vomit. Let's go back to the graveyard spirals now. What's going to happen is a pilot is going to enter a bank either to the left or to the right. And this can be intentional or completely unintentional. When someone holds a position like this for a prolonged period of time, then sensation then goes away. In other words, the pilot's going to get used to chilling in this direction. He then looks at his meter and realizes his wings aren't level with the horizon. And that is just your aircraft wings looking at the horizon on your dash. He's going to look at that and say, these look a little funky. Let me go ahead and straighten these out. With straightening this out, this is what gets the dizziness going. But the pilot distrusts his equipment because he thinks he's actually banking to the right when he's not. He's completely flying straight. The pilot then corrects this by going back into that original left bank, thinking that he is correct and his equipment is not. This will continue to spiral down and is going to create this illusion that he's flying straight. He is then going to lose altitude. And can anyone explain or answer as to why losing too much altitude is going to be a bad time? Yes, Airman Kincaid. Correct. Losing too much altitude is eventually going to cause impact to the ground and that pilot is going to die. Now, with that being said, we are going to move into the next one, also called the leans. This is the most common physiological episode. It is the ever slightest turn to the left or to the right. This can happen for a prolonged and gradual time. It's unnoticed because it's just too subtle. According to the FAA, an acceleration of 2 degrees or less actually isn't detectable at all by our ears and brain. Therefore, they don't even know that it's happening. Again, the pilot's going to look at his horizon and his wings and say, oh, oops, not level. He's going to go ahead and straighten them out, and then he's going to get the dizziness sensation and his eyes are going to spin. This is kind of like graveyard spirals, but just a little bit less extravagant. If the pilot doesn't correct his vestibular illusion, he's going to go back into that little lean. And this is what the instructor did on me when I flew the T-6 aircraft. It's totally true. I was banking left ever so slightly and he held it there for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then when he let go, my eyes were moving like a cartoon, like they were moving so fast and I couldn't see anything. And he kept telling me, level your wings, and you're trying to level your wings and your eyes are going crazy. It was so hard. However, now that we discussed the leans, let's move into my favorite physiological episode. This is called hypoxia. What does that even mean? That is low levels of oxygen in our tissue. Signs of this can be numbness and tingling, and that's typically in the hands and toes, an onset of a headache, and a loss of color vision. And just so everyone is on the same page, signs means this is what the person is feeling. You can't see it, but this is what they are feeling. I did do an altitude chamber ride several years ago, and when I was in the chamber, they gave me a color wheel that was all sorts of colors, right? We put the mask on, and we get in the chamber, and they say, look at all the colors and try and memorize it. Take the mask off. After a few minutes had gone by, looking at the color wheel, it all turned to black and white, which is the craziest thing to see, right? So we put our oxygen back on, which within a few seconds, the color came back. Moving on to symptoms, you can cough, mental light confusion, and I will tell you a story about this as well. I was doing a maze in the middle of my altitude chamber training, and about halfway through, when the oxygen kind of started to kick off, I thought I finished the maze. I thought I crushed it. It seemed easy. I didn't understand what was the hoax. Like I didn't understand it. Come find out, I put my mask back on and I completely cheated and drew a line literally from start to finish through the maze. And I kind of drew a picture. This is kind of what I did. I started to do it in the beginning, and then as soon as I got delusional, I just like penciled through it. But in my head, I thought I was doing perfectly fine. So mental confusion can absolutely happen. Also, people can go into like a drunk-like state. The friend that was in next to me, she wouldn't stop giggling and laughing at absolutely everything. Even if it wasn't funny, she was just cracking up. It actually got to a point where the instructors had to assist her with putting her oxygen back on because she thought it was too funny to do it herself. You can also have an onset of random sweatiness, like in the hands or like forehead area, and no one really likes sweaty hands, right? So in all of this happening, why is it important to correct it? Can anyone take a guess in why it would be important for a pilot to correct hypoxia before it's too late? Yes, because without oxygen, we're going to pass out. That's absolutely correct. Also, everyone has different signs and symptoms. If we're tying back to me and I got very confused versus the friend next to me who was completely laughing and giggling, every person has to figure out their own personal signs and symptoms. Even if it's like a tiny tingle in your finger, everyone is different. You can't watch a video of me in the altitude chamber and then say, yep, that's what's going to happen to me when I go in, because it can be totally different when you go in. Also, very horrible ending. You can cause loss of consciousness, and with loss of consciousness, we pass out. And even worse, if you're in an aircraft, you'll die. There is a way to correct this. Has anyone ever heard the term gang load, gang load, gang load, gang load the regulator? It is flipping all switches up. And if you're actually following me on the PowerPoint presentation, I'm not tech savvy, so I don't know how to put the slides behind me on a TV. So I drew the slide, and I'm just gonna come a little bit closer to you so I can explain it. All of these switches kind of look like light switches, and they're on the panel in your plane. But we are gonna move this from normal oxygen, flip it up to emergency. We're gonna move this normal oxygen up to 100%, and this off position and the on position. And you're gonna flick all three switches up. And this is known as gang loading your regulator. You are then going to put your aviator's mask on, put it over your face, and you're gonna click it in. I'm going to demo how it is to talk when you have 100% high flow oxygen. FYI, you're not going to be able to hear anything I'm saying, but when you have 100% high flow, this is exactly what it sounds like. So if you could understand that, props to you. But I couldn't even understand myself. Now that we talked about hypoxia, the next slide does have a YouTube video. Go ahead and click that link and follow the video, and then come back to this PowerPoint presentation. It's going to explain hypoxia, and it's actually going to go over a scenario of a real member in an altitude chamber. Now that we talked about hypoxia, let's move on to what we call positive G-force. The G stands for gravity. It is moving forward and in an upward position, moving like this. However, what goes up must come down. And again, if you're following with my slides, I'm gonna pull up the roller coaster that I drew. Don't make fun of my drawing. However, seeing how you're going up, however, gravity is gonna come down. What does that mean? This means blood is coming away from the brain. This is just gravity doing its work. It's gonna push your body down and you'll feel heavier. If not, you'll feel almost double your body weight. To kind of give an example of this, has anyone ever seen the YouTube videos or gone to a fair and ridden on the bungee jump? The reason why I say, like the one where you're strapped in and then they shoot you off into the sky. people aren't passing out, even though the videos are funny. People aren't passing out of fear from the ride. They're passing out because they hit so many G's at once that it caused them to pass out. And something what's called G-lock, which I'm going to explain a little bit later. But that's positive G-force, using that slingshot as a reference. Now that we talked about positive G-force, let's talk about the negative G-force. This is simply the opposite of positive G-force. You are now moving in a downward position. And again, coming back to my roller coaster drawing, we're now over the hump and we are now coming down. So now with coming down, things are gonna come back up, meaning the blood is gonna come back to your brain. This can cause visual impairments, especially if the blood is just rushing up to your head really, really fast. That's actually one of the first signs that those negative G's are kind of doing a negative effect on the pilot. Also, blood vessels will burst in the upper torso and arms, in a funny term that the aviation world call it. They call it the Geezels, because it does look like little red dots all over the arms. Also with negative G-force, you kind of have like a floating sensation. I've never free-falled or skydived, but I've had a few friends tell me that when they jumped out of the plane, it didn't even feel like they were falling. They just felt like they were on a cloud and all they heard was like the wind passing down them, so like a floating sensation. And also this does pull you out of your seat. You know, when you're going down in a roller coaster, you're holding on to the handrails and you naturally come forward. Same thing. However, now that I've pulled you out of your seat, stay there because we're going to talk about the G maneuver and then I'm going to demonstrate how to do it for you. But before we even get there, before the flight even happens, I'm talking a day before the flight, we want to hydrate. What did they tell us in BMT for all the enlisted folks? Like hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. You also want to eat complex carbs. Complex carbs take longer to break down and they convert to sugar as you digest them. A great example is a plain bagel with peanut butter. You also want to get loads of rest, and I'm going to explain rest later at the end of the G maneuver demonstration. I'll come back to that later, I will not forget. The first thing we want to do is we want to relax our upper body. Vital organs are all right here. We want the blood to move right here. If you tensed everything up and you sat in the aircraft like this, blood isn't going to be able to move anywhere and it's just going to pool where it's at, and you want blood in your heart and in your brain while you're doing this activity. So relax the upper body. However, you want to flex your lower body. This prevents blood from going down because remember, we want to keep blood up here, right? So you're going to flex your lower body. Weirdly enough, you also want to flex your calves. Who can tell me how they can flex their calves in a sitting position? Yes, Airman Haug. Close, not quite. So you're not going to stand on your tippy toes. I'm going to show you. If you stand pigeon-toed and then you have an imaginary beach ball right here in your hands, and you put this imaginary beach ball in between your legs and squeeze that beach ball tight while being pigeon-toed, you are actually activating every muscle in your legs. And we're going to use that later when I demonstrate it. You also want to focus on your breathing, and you want to close your epiglottis. I'm going to show you how to do that. When you take a breath in and you hold it, that's how you close it. So watch me. And then keep your mouth open. Watch me again. Yes. Now when we exhale, we're going to do short breaths. And I'm going to demo that. FYI, it's going to sound really weird, but it's just the short breaths that are coming out. So I'm going to do it right now. Weird, right? If you don't do this properly though, you can go into something called G-lock, which is just loss of consciousness. That's tying back to the bungee jump ride. When you see people pass out, they're G-locking. They're not passing out because they're terrified of the ride. Now that we went over how to do it, I actually have a chair behind me, and I'm going to reposition the camera, and we're going to demo this. Remember, stand pigeon-toed. Take our imaginary beach ball, we're going to put it in between our legs, We're gonna squeeze the beach ball and everything should feel tight. You're gonna loosen your upper body. Keep it nice and relaxed. Now, hold your breath and breathe. Whew! Weird, right? Move back up. Now that I showed you how to do it and you kind of feel like the exhaustion behind it, could you imagine doing that over and over again for like a 2-hour flight? Let me tell you something. I got a story for you. At my last base, I got to fly in a T-38 aircraft, and I think our flight was maybe an hour. If you include landing and takeoff, maybe like an hour and 15 minutes. I was so exhausted at the end of that flight. I felt like I got hit by a truck, that I ran a marathon, I did a triathlon, I swam like 20 miles. I was so tired. And this is tying back to why rest was so important, because if I had not slept at all that night prior, that flight would have honestly sucked. And I would have had to tolerate it and put up with it as much as I can until we landed, or would have had to come on the mic and say, hey man, you're gonna have to tone it down a notch. Like I feel like I'm gonna throw up. I feel like I'm gonna pass out. I don't think I'm cut out for this. I don't think I can do this. Rest is so important. I actually think I slept like 10 hours that night, and I ate so much food. I had like so much pasta because I was just so hungry. But that's, having a good night's rest is super important when it comes to actually showing you what it's actually about. So today we discussed physiological events such as graveyard spins, the leans, hypoxia. The spins is ground impact, and the leans is just that settle back and forth. We also talked about my fun times in the altitude chamber and how to gang load a regulator. Remember, gang load, gang load, gang load. Put the mask over your face and breathe. We also wrapped it up with positive and negative G-force, and I also demonstrated how to do the G-force maneuver for you. Remember the roller coaster reference. What goes up must come down. All this information is viable for pilots to perfect all this physiological training. This is why they have such extensive training to even begin with, because a random tingle in the finger or randomly feeling dizzy or getting a headache can dictate life or death later on. If someone passes out, there is a chance that that plane is going to go down and impact the ground. We don't want to take that chance. Does anyone have any questions on today's lecture? I will be staying back for those who don't like asking questions in front of people, which is totally fine. Otherwise, we're going to take a 10-minute break and we're going to come back for the next lecture. Thank you.